All right, let's jump right in. We're going to take just one single, really dense and dramatic verse from the Bible's final book, and we are going to unpack it piece by piece. My advice, try to forget what you think you know, because we're going straight to the source material. So, here it is, Revelation 18, verse 3. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Wow. I mean, that is a powerful statement, right? It's painting this picture of total global corruption. You've got nations, kings, and merchants all tangled up in it. But what do these intense, almost poetic words really mean? Well, to really get to the heart of this verse, just reading it in English, it's not going to cut it. It really only gets you so far. It's kind of like staring at a locked treasure chest. And the key to unlocking that chest? Well, it's the language it was originally written in, Koine Greek. Once we start looking at the original words, we can uncover these incredible layers of meaning that are sort of hidden in the translation. Okay, so let's start by breaking down three absolutely crucial Greek words. These words form the very core of the accusations in this verse. And trust me, this is where the story really gets going. First up is this word porneia. Now, in English, it's translated as fornication. And yeah, it can mean physical sexual immorality. But its symbolic use, especially in prophetic writing, is way, way more important. It's really pointing to a kind of spiritual unfaithfulness. And that right there is the key. You see, all throughout the scriptures, porneia is used as this really powerful metaphor for abandoning a secret promise or a covenant to chase after worldly power and money instead. So when Revelation talks about fornication, what it's really describing is a system that has committed spiritual adultery. It's traded its most important allegiance for stuff like worldly power, control, and profit. Okay, next up is thymos, which we read as wrath. But again, the English word doesn't quite capture it. This isn't just being mad. The Greek here implies a boiling, passionate, almost explosive fury. So the wine the nations are drinking isn't just bad, it's intensely and passionately destructive. And finally, we get to this really interesting and very rare word, stranos. It's translated as delicacies or abundance, but it's so much more specific than that. It means a kind of reckless, over-the-top, sensual indulgence. You know, think extreme, mind-blowing luxury that's completely disconnected from any kind of morality. So let's put this all together. You start to see that this verse isn't just one big blanket accusation. No, it's a specific charge sheet against three very distinct groups: the nations, the kings, and the merchants. And each one is playing a different part in this huge system of corruption. Let's start with that first group. What in the world does it mean for entire nations to be drunk on this wine? You know, this imagery isn't actually new to Revelation. The Old Testament prophet Jeremiah used the exact same metaphor. He describes a powerful system, which he calls Babylon, offering this intoxicating ideology, this wine, that ends up influencing all the nations of the world and leads them all astray. Now let's talk about this second group, the kings of the earth, which you can think of as the world's leaders. Their crime is described with that very specific word we just looked at, porneia. The source material really suggests a tragic story here. See, according to texts like Exodus, leaders were meant to be a kingdom of priests, to reflect righteousness. But in this verse, they've completely abandoned that promise. They've formed an alliance, a spiritual fornication, with a worldly system of power. The New Testament book of James puts it even more bluntly. It basically says, choosing friendship with the world's corrupt systems is a form of spiritual adultery, putting you at odds with God. It's forcing a choice between two totally opposing allegiances. And finally, that brings us to the merchants. Their sin is tied directly to the money they've made. But this isn't about honest trade or simple commerce. Remember that rare Greek word we found, strenos? This is where it comes roaring back. Their wealth comes from taking part in and profiting from this system of opulent, sensual, and corrupt excess. They've gotten rich by feeding this machine of wanton luxury. So, what does this all add up to? The nations, the kings, the merchants, they are all participating in a system that Revelation personifies as Babylon the Great Harlot. And this symbol of the harlot, it has really deep roots.
I mean, time and time again in the Old Testament, from Isaiah to Jeremiah, you see a city or a nation that was once faithful, but then becomes corrupt, described as a harlot. It's this consistent metaphor for a broken covenant.
And what this does is it sets up this really stark contrast that runs through the whole text. The choices between being the bride, which is faithful, righteous, in covenant, and being the harlot, allied with worldly power, chasing control, and committing spiritual adultery. So here's the bottom line. When we decode the Greek and trace these symbols back through the text, Revelation 18:3 emerges not as some literal future prediction, but as this powerful symbolic takedown of any system at any point in history that compromises its core purpose for power, for wealth, and for worldly influence. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. Whether you view these texts as sacred scripture or just as ancient literature, how can understanding this kind of potent symbolic language give us a totally new lens for analyzing the complex systems of power, wealth, and influence that are all around us in our own world?